Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here for our first webinar of the Plex platform series for um, really 2024 and kicking off into 2025. Today we have myself, David Shupp, ERP Development Manager for Revolution Group, presenting with you, and we also have Kathleen Marie on the line here as one of our panelists. She's going to be presenting as well with you today. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Today, we're going to go through custom fields and custom objects. And not just that, we're going to be going through it from really problem-focused viewpoints and solving kind of real-world problems that we've seen with custom fields. So we're going to go through some definitions of custom fields, how those link in with forms and grids, how we can use those as filters on Plex application screens, how they can be added to Vision Plex reports, APIs or external integration with custom fields, label designer, and kind of what I'm most excited to get into today is kind of building out an applied usage of custom fields that we're going to continue on in this webinar and then the following webinar for enhancing the cycle count system. From a little bit of housekeeping, as you have questions during the webinar, please put that into the questions area inside of GoToWebinar. We're going to circle back through during the webinar and make sure we answer those questions on the webinar with everyone, or at the very least, if we can't get to every question, we're going to circle back and answer questions kind of following the webinar and share out that Q&A content with the group post the webinar. Okay, so custom fields are a new feature inside of the Plex platform. They're a pretty powerful extensibility tool set that allows you to organize and input data that is really unique to your business and to your unique use case. They can have many different types of data that goes into those, such as numbers, text, reference to other either custom information or what's referred to as Plex standard objects like parts, routings, BOMs, invoices. Okay, so what is a custom field? Well, a custom field is it's a unique field that obviously you can customize for a Plex standard object. So Plex standard objects is kind of what I just talked about just a little bit, where we have parts, BOMs, routings, really those core tenets for an object inside of Plex. We can have as many custom objects as we would like linked to one of those standard Plex objects, such as a part for this example. So on the screen here, I have a standard object selected of part. And for this quick example, I set up a custom field called color. So I wanted to name that field, which the name on a custom field, think of it like a database field. It's a very specific field that has to be unique to this custom field for the standard object, and it can't have any spaces or really any special characters like dollar signs. It's a really plain field that's used to identify a custom field from the database side of things. And then from the kind of user facing side of things, we have label. So in this example, I'll say the name color and a label of color. But I could have picked something in here like a label of color of part, which could have been a better example for label. We have a description here on the custom field as well, which allows you to establish, I would say, a user-defined description of what that custom field is meant to be used for. We have sort order, which the sort order will control the exact order that custom fields will be displayed on those standard Plex objects and screens, which we'll show you how to set those up in just a moment. We have field types, which allow you to establish what type of information we're going to display in here. This example I have up as the field type of text. We have required, which makes this custom field on that standard Plex object part as a required field that needs to be completed. We have field length, which establishes the maximum or minimum, maximum size of the field. For a custom field, that can go all the way out to 500 characters. And it can go down to as few as 1 character in length. One of the neat functions that we can have with the field type of text that I have on the screen here is allowed values. This allows us to build out a list dropdown that we can see for color, for example. We have all of the colors that are applicable to this part. And when we set this up, it'll show as a drop-down list for the user to be able to select which specific values that they want to have for this custom object as a way to maintain some of your data input. If you're familiar with the part attributes side of things, this is pretty similar to the use value function inside of part attributes. It controls the input into here. Not only we're controlling the length, we're also controlling like the list of options that are available. So data types in the custom field, there can be there are many different data types you can choose from. Booleans, for example, this is commonly depicted inside of Plex as a checkbox. Database side of things is either it's true or it's false. We have a custom object reference, which we'll get to what a custom object is in just a little bit, but allows you to link to that very, very custom, almost like a setup table type of value. We have dates, date times we can have, decimals, integers. We can have also a standard object reference, which is a good example of that. Let's say we have a work center set up inside of Plex, right? We could have a custom object, or really custom field, with a standard object reference as the data type, pointing to the employee tables to be able to assign an employee to that work center as an example. Here we have text, which we just went through a little bit ago, which the unique thing there is allows us to get a list of choices. and then we have time. So custom fields themselves, they need to be, when we set them up, we can choose where we want that custom field to be displayed at. So along this same route, I have in here what's called actions for the custom fields. So this custom field we're looking at is for the standard object of parts. So with parts, these are the standard Plex screens and objects that we can simply add these to. It can show up on many different fields as a display value, which a display value will allow you to, if it's from a grid, it'll allow you to view the data. If it's from the standard object, the main detail page for that standard object, for example, like parts, part detail, we would be able to go in and maintain that field from here. And then same thing for filters. The filters, depending on the custom field that is selected, they can be used to filter those standard Plex screens and applications. For parts, the only filter that is available today is from the parts list. So if we wanted to have a usage of our color attribute on our parts list, and we wanted to filter by all parts that were of a specific color, that'd be a pretty easy thing to do to expose that custom field to our parts list or our parts as a filter, and we'd be able to search from that. All right, so I just did a lot of talking. So let's build a custom field. Okay. So I'm on the screen custom fields. I've got parts on my mind, obviously. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to come into this, I'm going to say select add, and I'm going to select the Plex standard object that I want to add a custom field to. And if you've looked at this list from maybe a month ago or so, there are some very brand new options here for custom fields, which have just released. So previously there was a list of maybe 10, 15 different standard Plex objects, and now we're up to around 50. So I'm going to come into here and I'm going to select part. Notice there's a bunch of different part options to choose from. So I'm going to select part. And what I want to select here is not my name. Thank you for the fill in there. Let's do something kind of fun. Let's do a okay, a common one that I've used a lot in the past is, well, we want to see groupings of parts that are assigned to a specific product type, which example, you could be using the part product types or part product groups. So inside of that, we could be calling out let's call it a motor, for like a motor type. Okay. So motor types, right? I'll keep this pretty simple for motor types. I don't want to upset all the potential gearheads on the call. I'm going to keep it with text. I want to have my motor types probably not required. let's do a field length of, let's say 25. I'm going to have a motor type of DC motor. I'm going to have a type of petrol motor. And I'm going to have a type of hamster wheel, which hamster is a tough word. Hamster wheel. Okay. That's the main setup of what I want this motor type to look like from a data perspective. Now, the thing that is almost more important than just defining your custom fields is, well, where do I want to have this custom field show up at? Where is this relevant for the people who are going to be using this field? Well, I want to make sure that we can set it up and reference it to this part. It probably makes sense to have it show up on the bill of materials, and maybe an inventory would be a good spot for it to show up. So I've selected display in those fields there, and I've selected on the parts, I've selected the filter option. So I'm going to go and I'm going to populate our FGL part with this custom field. So custom fields for parts, they are really displayed here at the bottom of the grids, usually for the custom fields. So it comes in this custom data area here. I've got many custom fields right now tied to parts. I've got, let's see, our motor type that we created. I've got engineering change number. I've got the part color that we looked at. We might as well call this a green hamster wheel. And we've got a required engineering change number in here. I'm going to give it a really thoughtful number. Hit OK. And now that I have that listed on that part, well, I can now filter by it. So I can filter my parts list by, well, what are all of my parts that are hamster wheels? Search, and it returns back on the main grid there. I have our motor types. I also have our engineering change number. And if maybe this didn't make sense to display that on this specific spot here for the bill of material, but it shows me also on this screen that these are components that go into a hamster wheel. Okay, so custom fields, I think as you see, there's many different ways that you can be putting in supplemental information inside of Plex that allows you to better store information, to better search, and to bring information to your user base that is right where they want to be able to use it and to see it. The next thing I want to talk through are a little bit harder of a concept to wrap your head around initially, but they are custom objects. Custom object is a collection of custom fields. They can be related also to a standard Plex data object, as we saw through that custom field to tie it into there. They can also be unrelated to a standard Plex object, which this could be used for storing data in a future state. Currently, we can put data into here with an API. and they will soon to be used in process flows and also be used in the new composable apps that are coming down the line. And the best way to think of a custom object is a custom setup table. Or if you're using process flows, right, they could be, once they're supported in process flows, they're a custom data repository for your process flows. So I have an example up here to have an easy jumping off point, as it's a little clicky to show. So I have on here cycle count ABCs as a standard, or I'm sorry, as a custom object. Inside of that custom object, I have what I'm calling a count class, which we can see that here on the screen. We can see the A, B, C, D. And then on the specific instance inside of that custom object, we have the days per class, which, right, ABCs, right, daily, weekly, monthly, be quarterly. And it's a good illustration of how that is. It's kind of setup table like. And it's pretty similar to custom fields, but it allows you to link multiple fields into a custom object. So in this instance, for the cycle count ABCs, we identify a primary field. This is the primary display for the custom object. Thinking back through the last slide there, the A, B, C, D, that being the cycle or the count class. So we said on here, let's display this by our ABCs. And then I also want to have in here our days per class, which uses the same data type structure as our standard fields. And then as well, it shows us every place that this is used at on standard fields to be able to tie them into Plex standard objects. So in this instance, we have on the part, we have a custom cycle count class as our custom field. And that custom field is referenced back to this custom object, which is the way to link our setup table-like functionality for custom objects, link them to that standard object with the custom field to tie it to it. Again, they use the same type of data types that existed on the custom fields. Okay. So let's build out a custom field here. I'm going to try to take this a little slow, as it could be hard to wrap your head around completely what a custom object is. Hope I've done a good job of explaining it. I know it took me a couple reads through to have it fully click. So I'm going to go on the same wheel here. Let's call this hamster cages. Okay, so I've got my hamster cage or cages set up as a custom object. And inside of here, well, I don't have any fields yet, right? It's really just a blank thing that's called hamster cages. The first thing I want to do is, well, let's let's have cage names. Probably should have this as text. Let's keep it to 50. Okay. The next thing I want to describe here is, well, let's do size. Oops. Size in square inches or inches squared. Let's do that as integer. And with this thing an integer now, we can come into here and say, well, what is my minimum size? I don't think it's possible to have a negative square inch object. Let's do that as a 0. My maximum value, let's say we sell pretty big hamster enclosures. Okay. The other thing let's call out color. Okay, color. I'm going to take a little bit of a Henry Ford route here with a bonus color. So we've got black and steel colored enclosures. I'm going to hit OK. Now this brings me back to my standard object here. So I have my age name, color, size. Well, I want to display this by the cage name. I want to look at it by the size in squared inches or cubed. And now that I have that as a standard object, we need to add some values to the object for us to be able to choose this on records. So I'm going to come into here to view data. I'm going to click add. Now I'm going to keep this pretty vanilla. Okay, I'm going to say I've got a small, I've got a medium, I've got a large, and I've got a jumbo. Okay, so I have all of the custom objects right now. Right now, they're not linked to anything. They're really just existing right now as a repository of data. If I want to have them linked to a standard object inside of Plex, I need to come into go back to our custom fields. I'm going to click add. Let's go to our, it's parts, or part. Let's call this hamster enclosures. It's probably a better public-facing name. Field type, I'm going to pick on here the standard object reference. I'm going to select my object reference, which are hamster cages. I'm going to go to my part detail, my parts, and I might as well include it on my filters because who knows, we may want to filter by that. So I'm going to go into my parts list. Yep, I don't think it makes sense to add it to our motor here. Let's do this part here, FGR. So again, the standard objects are going to be located in the custom data side of things. I have my custom field that I just created. Again, it's a reference to a custom object. And I can now select that cage name, which will be the primary kind of display value. But then I can also see on here, well, what are the colors? What are the sizes? This is the aspect that these are really similar to setup tables. Got to have an engineering change number. I've already used 1, 2, 3, 4, probably should be 5. And same thing as before, I can now filter on my standard object, which I've only got one hamster cage, which is a small enclosure. And that's pretty much it for the custom object side of things. They're really, really versatile. Just like the custom fields, I see them being really, really useful to help control some more setup table like inputs. And then as they kind of grow out in functionality for the new composable apps, the process flows, they'll be really, really powerful. The kind of first example that we had, right, of the cycle count classes, I think it's easy to imagine a cycle count scheduling engine built with process flows using custom objects to help define a lot of those key critical inputs in there. Okay. To do a side-by-side between custom fields and custom objects, right, both of them can be used in really VisionPlex for filters, for columns. They can be used in expressions. APIs we can get, add, update those with the developer portal APIs. We can get them with data source calls, which those are the kind of the older HTTP data sources, sometimes called Denali, which they need to be registered with a support case to be able to get that custom field data set to be returned with that data source. Custom fields right now can be used in process flows. Process flows can add, get, update, and to fully control what data gets put into those custom fields on those standard objects. However, they're not supported in, or custom objects are not supported in process flows yet as of the time of this recording of December 2024. Both custom fields and custom objects can be used to reference other custom objects to have a nested relationship. All right, time for a poll. All right, which feature of custom fields are you most interested in? Kind of surprising. We've got a about an even split between the top 3 choices here, with only the custom fields and Vision Plex of beating things out by a smaller margin than I anticipated. Okay, so we discussed a little bit around using custom fields as filters in our example that we used there. So custom fields as filters, obviously they allow you to be able to filter your standard VisionPlex screens with the custom fields. The only caveat to custom fields as filters is that they can only be linked to the primary standard object today. So if I go into custom fields, and let's say I go to add here, and I'm going to pick one from the list here. Let's say I pick serialized pieces. You see here, maybe that's a bad example. Let's say equipment. All right, so we can see here with equipment that I selected, it can be displayed in many different places that are related to equipment. But really the filter, as of right now, is restricted to just the primary Plex standard object. So the main screen that you use to search equipment, which in this instance, right, it is the equipment screen. And it'll be the only field or application that can be added with a filter with just one click side of things. So if I wanted to add an equipment, let's say I wanted to add a mean time between failures. That's a pretty common metric to put for equipment. This will be a decimal. Let's say I don't think they can be negative because they'd be in perpetual failure. And then maximum, let's see if we can do a really big number there. All right, so I'm going to select it as a filter, equipment detail here. We can see my mean time between failures. Because I picked a decimal here, it shows up as the way to easily filter between from a value to a value. So I'm going to select my top piece of equipment here. I'm going to select in here my MTBF, mean time between failure. Now, if we truly wanted to use a custom field here to do mean time between failures, usually that's done by tracking the time between certain work request types. It would probably make sense to do what I'm going to do here by hand, to have process flows run that on a batch. Maybe like a once a week process or once a day, to keep that mean time between failure metric up to date, as this really should be a living metric on this piece of equipment. So I probably should put days in here or hours. Let's say it's hours. So let's say for 96 hours. Not super great for this piece of equipment. But now that I have that mean time between failure there, I can go to here and say, well, I could do what's 90 to 100,000, and I'd be able to see all of my equipment that has a high uptime percentage. Now, the other piece that we could do here is, well, the opposite of this. What's my kind of low or my equipment with the lowest reliability, which would be able to show you that. And again, that custom field really should be managed by process flows to make sure that that is up to date. And then from custom fields inside of VisionPlex side of things, the custom fields, they can be added to a VisionPlex report pretty simply. So if we go into our data sources screen, and I'm going to pick a data source that is Query Writer. Let's look at one that says part. Okay, so once I have like a Query Writer data source, you can go in and add these to your own Query Writer data sources. But if you want to add them to a live production Sprock, you want to make sure you reach out to Plex support through a case to request those to be added. From the data source side of things, we can add the identifier here with a standard object, and we have to use the key that is kind of the main identifier for that standard object. So an instance body part key, standard object is probably part. And just by linking that part standard object, it shows up as an option for us to be able to select inside of VisionPlex. And that would be drug out to the screen just how we would any other data that was exposed as part of the data source. And the way we can interact with custom fields right now from the like an API standpoint, we have APIs in the developer portal. For sake of time, I'll send out the links to those APIs here after the webinar, but it allows you with the developer portal APIs to be able to get, update, add values to custom fields, custom objects, and then by very nature of adding a custom field to a data source, which are those HTTP data sources, all of that custom field information will come along for the ride as you call that data source after it's been registered.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of some real world cases here. Let me. Okay, so we're going to talk about how custom fields can be used with the Label Designer. So, you know, maybe you've had a situation, a lot of times I see part attributes be used for this to capture data for a part that you need to print on a label. But there are some limits with attributes as far as sometimes you can get into field character limitations and stuff like that. So the first example that I want to talk about is an ingredient statement. So I'm going to go here to my food and beverage PCN, and you can see here I've created this ingredient statement. So I've tied this to the part, created my label. It's going to be a text field. I made it very long, field length of 300. I'm not going to make it required. Doesn't have to be unique. Some of the fields that David has already talked us through here, all I really want this to show, because really it's nothing that we're going to be looking at on a daily basis. I just really need it to print on the label. So I'm going to put this on the part detail. So all that is already set up. Now, if I go over to my parts and I want to look at my flower, so now you can see here, it's actually very long, but I've added this, this ingredient statement that tells me everything that's in my flower here that I've added to my part record. Again, I've only selected for it to just show up in this spot because I'm really just using it to tie to the label. Now let's go over to the label designer and look at how I did that. So if we look at this label here and go into this particular spot on the label, element data, you can see here there is a data source that is called custom field. So pretty straightforward. This data source is available in the label designer. So once I pick my data source name of custom fields, then the only data sources I'm going to have available here to select for my label are the ones that I've set up. So this is the only one here that I have. So my label is all set up to print this custom field. If I go back over to my part and go into my inventory, and I'm going to print this label here, print selected labels. Hopefully this all. And pull this over. So now you can see my label here with my ingredient statement that printed on here saying that everything that is in this flower, which would have, been more characters than the attribute field would have allowed. So pretty straightforward and easy use for getting something on a label, using those custom fields for your labels. So very handy. Okay. So all of this will be, this is being recorded. Someone asked that as one of the questions, and it will be available afterwards too. So, okay, so another real world example is, everyone is really familiar with rates and Plex, I'm sure. So we already have spots to put in the ideal rate, the standard rate, the target rates. You're able to keep track of, that 100% run rate, which is your ideal, the standard rate, which is, what you typically run at, and your target rate, which is your goal. But maybe you have a quoted rate that you would like to keep up with. You've quoted this to the customer. It's been a couple of years. You don't know how far off track you've gotten. Is this, are you losing a lot of money on this because you've quoted it to run much faster than it is? So we're going to look at a way to store that so you can easily keep that handy and visible to you. So now I am over in the regular Rev Group PCN, and you're going to see here that we've added several fields here for the quoted rate. We've got the quoted crew size, the quoted rate, the quoted setup crew, and the setup time. So all of those are available. I'm not going to go into those setups. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing really special about them. I would say that, you want to put some kind of indicator on there when you're putting the label, which is what the user is going to see. Make sure they know, if you just say quoted rate, what do you mean? Are you talking minutes, hours, whatever? So make sure that on your labels you are identifying that for the end user. But now if we go over to our parts and we look at this stamped finished good part. And because we're running short on time, we'll go ahead and look at the engineering change number field as well. So as David had pointed out, I did make this a required field. So another use case, is maybe engineers typically live right in a different system. They're not coming into Plex. They maybe are looking for their things based off of an engineering change number, ECR number, some other number that they're familiar with. So I've also created this one and made this a required field. So you can't add a new part without adding an engineering change number. So we've got that field here, and we also, I'm on the wrong, I added that to process routing, my rate. So sorry, let's go over here. So if we go here to our process routing and we look under the approved work center, we're going to see the rates that we're accustomed to, right? We have our standard rate, our ideal rate, and our target rate, but no place for our quoted rate. So I'm going to go in here to the stamped process routing because that's what I added it to and not the part field. And you can see here that now I have all of my custom rate fields. And as David mentioned, we could pull this stuff if you wanted one report that you wanted to pull all of this together so you could be able to see, what your standard rates are, your target rates, and maybe you want to see like your actual, OEE and pull some of those numbers into one report. You could pull all of those things into one report so you'd have that all visible in one screen, and it would be able to pull from this custom data where we did our quoted rate. So I'm going to quickly talk about the engineering change number. So you can see here that it's showing up on the parts screen, but I could also filter by that engineering change number. So, if that is the number that the engineer is familiar with, and I hear this a lot, sometimes the part numbers, they're not as familiar with the part numbers, by a different number. So they would be able to filter by that number that they're accustomed to, find that part then and go in and see, if there's inventory, look at any of the other information they want, bill of material, all of that stuff by searching for that number that they're accustomed to. And there are some integration opportunities as well, like if you needed to, fill this in using a data source or an API with your integration to your CAD system. So I think that we are quickly approaching our time. David, did you want to do any closing to maybe talk about what's next in the series?
Yeah. I'm going to grab the screen here. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to be doing this as a series of webinars covering platform. One of the chief things that we're going to be building out, which it doesn't look like we're going to be able to have time to completely cover it in its full glory, would be how we can use custom fields, process flows to enhance kind of cycle counting side of things. I'll introduce it from a teaser bit for the next webinar that we're going to be doing in January. But essentially with cycle counting, right? Almost every single business that has inventory cycle counts. It's a critical part of your business. It's really important that you can trust your inventory. I think if all of us have heard the question, how can I trust this if this inventory truly exists? Is this container still here? It's from 2015? Can you go check if it's still there? And that really just, it spends a lot of time and organizational energy of answering those questions. So we can solve this, at least part of it, with Plex Extend, with custom fields and process flows. So we have laid this out in two parts to be able to solve this need. We have a custom fields side of things to be able to hold the data, to be able to present the data in here. And then we also have, well, the need to have this data updated and maintained without adding yet another piece of data entry for your teams. We're going to answer the question, when did I last cycle count this container? What is the average cycle count accuracy for this part? And we're going to go through this as the first step here in this next webinar. And we'll pick up on creating those custom fields, be able to define those out. And then we're going to go through some of the basics of process flows. And then we're going to build out a process flow to be able to do this cycle counting enhancement, to be able to answer those questions, right? When did I last count this container? What was my overall accuracy for this part? If you haven't asked a question yet to the chat, I think we've got the majority of them answered, but feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer any other questions and follow-up that you may have around custom fields and custom objects and how they can be applied and used. Again, thank you very much for your time today. I know your time is very valuable.
Thanks, everybody.